The first two ideas are about creating responsive, flexible, and meaningful programming. The second two are about financing and communicating what you do. And the final idea is about situating your work in relation to public policy change, something that is really dear to my heart. So we'll get at it. The first is listen. Sounds pretty obvious, but it's not that easy to pull off. One of the most critical things an organization can do is listen well. And you can't listen every 4 years when you decide to do your strategic plan. You need to make it habitual. You need to make it part of your organizational DNA. And at the beginning of our reinvention of the stop, and I'm proud to say we continue this, we listened a lot, and we continue to listen a lot. With partner organizations, with funders, with staff, and most importantly with the community members that are going to walk through your door on a regular basis. We did that through community dinners, where you come together and you have a good social time, and you break into groups and talk very pointedly about what's working, what's not working, and where the gaps are in your neighborhood. We did it through informal town hall meetings and programs to stand up and start talking to community members above and beyond the direct service about what's going on. We do that through an annual survey. Every year we do an annual survey. What's going on? What's the pulse in the neighborhood and in the organization? Focus conversations with community leaders will help you figure out why some people aren't coming to your center. Why aren't they coming? What's going on out there? You need to do that. You need to check in with the principal of the local school every now and again. And a big thing is you need to check in with your staff. Daily, people are coming up to your staff, and you need to prepare your staff to be open and willing to hear it, both good and bad, from the community. And then what's central is you have to feed that information back in to the organizational intellect, whether that's through program evaluations at the end of the year, logs, reports, or staff meetings. You need to take that information that's on the front line and get it back into the organization so you can work with it. And you listen to be relevant, and you listen to be responsive, and also because it creates a feeling and a sense, both in your physical space where you're doing your work, and in the wider community, that you value people and their ideas, that people have something to say, and that you're willing to listen to them. This is very important. Jane Jacobs famously said once, cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody. Same applies for organizations. Same applies for organizations. You have to live and breathe and listen. And if you don't, you'll be out to lunch and you won't be relevant. And I would say one thing, you have to pay particular attention to what your staff has to say. It's critical to nurture and be receptive to ideas and feedback from your staff team. Encourage them to contribute. We have something called the idea funnel. Just throw ideas into it. You never know what's going to stick, but ideas are everywhere. And you need to create space for that. At staff meetings, you need to encourage staff to walk into your office anytime they want to tell you something. You have to make it a standing item at your board staff retreat, and you have to do that annually, of course. Recent example, someone came in, one of my staff came in and said, I want to talk to you about a community grocery store. Great. We talked for 25 minutes. It wasn't on my agenda for the day, but it was a fantastic conversation, which we're going to put out there and have a more robust conversation. We'll track it down. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? We'll figure that out. They had an idea that they wanted to share, and they're looking out there all over the place. And an open to the conversation mentality supports an organizational culture of innovation and creativity. It can build momentum in an organization. People feel invested, they feel engaged, they feel challenged, they feel excited. I sometimes walk away from staff meetings shaking my head at the breadth of stuff that's going on. Staff creatively coming at their work in new ways, reinventing themselves in the same role. Now, the caveat to this is that not every idea is a good one. And that's why you need a plan. Something that will filter and rein in the many suggestions that are out there. And there are many. And as you grow as an organization, there will be many of them coming at you. And if you have a plan, it'll give you confidence to say yes and no. And that takes me to the second point. Create a plan, but don't always stick to it. And here's what I mean by this. So once you marry listening with an honest analysis of your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, threats, you get a plan. A roadmap that allows you to be clear internally and externally about the difference you're making in the world and the various initiatives you're pursuing to make that difference. When we listened we heard loud and clear that food banks don't cut it. And so we focused our efforts on using food to build health, to build dignity, to build community, to build environmental sustainability, and to build greater equity. Over the years, we've had various taglines. Fighting hunger, building hope, inspiring change was an early one. That morphed into food, community, change. And now we say the power of food. And it may sound a bit superficial, but it's crucial to distill in a very tight way what it is you do. You need to boil it down to the essence. And it's well worth it, because if you have something that you're clear about, you'll stay focused and stay out of the weeds of mission drift. I can talk a lot about mission drift, but it happens and it's a problem. There is no perfect plan. It's always a work in progress. Don't make it into a mountain, and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Get the plan out into the world. Make your plan fairly broad, because you need room to maneuver within the key pillars of the broad strokes of that plan. So for us, it's advocacy for social justice, healthy food, leadership in the food movement, and healthy organization. And write it down and make it public. I'm amazed at how few organizations make their plan public so all can see it. And an apology to all consultants in the room. But you can't outsource the development of your plan. You know best, if you listen well, what needs to happen. While you might hire an outside person to help facilitate a process, at the end of the day, you need to own it and you need to write it. There is no panacea called a consultant on this one. You know what you have to do, and you have to get it out there. I would say that I'm a bit of a micromanager, I'll be honest. And I would say that the plan is something you want to micromanage to the nth degree. And when you start to implement your plan, when you're listening and open to ideas, something interesting is going to happen. You'll start to say no to things and feel good about it, because you'll know why you're saying no to them. That feels really good, to be able to say no to something. Someone once said to me, you only know you're on track when you say no to a really, really good idea. And for us, it was a project up in the north of the city in an inner suburb where there was a big tract of land, and a developer said, here, we want to give it to you so you can create, well, whatever you want to do with it. An urban farm, a big area to celebrate backyard gardening in the city. And we looked at it up and down all over the place. I really wanted to do it. I was gung-ho to do it. The organization was flipping out. It was this, we cannot do this. It's going to take us away from a big project called the Green Barn that we had just developed. It was going to be resource heavy and take a lot of brain power away from what we were doing. And, you know, we said no at the end of the day after a couple of feasibility studies. And it felt so good to say no, and it was the right thing to do at that time in our organization's trajectory. And in a way, the reason I mentioned that example is that it took us to point 3. It takes us to point 3, which is embrace your inner entrepreneur. And I'll say this, that what we managed to do is, because we're quite opportunistic and fairly nimble, and I'll talk to you about nimble and how that's related to the kind of funding that you have as an organization, we were able to take the project up in the north, not do it, but realize it within our organization anyway. So at the Green Barn, at Christie and St. Clair, where we have 10,000 square feet of space, there was an empty barn doing nothing. Parks and Rec had done nothing with it. And we decided, well, why don't we do all this work we want to do around backyard gardening and backyard sharing and celebrating the immigrant communities that have always turned grass into food. We'll do it there. So we convinced Parks and Rec to do it. We created a program called YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard. We created gardens called the Global Root Gardens, which celebrates immigrants' contributions to food in this city. And we then developed an event called Big Night at the Green Barn. You ever seen that great Italian movie called Big Night? We called it Big Night at the Green Barn. And in our first year, we raised $120,000 for that project. So we were able to, you know, we had a good idea. Didn't quite work over there, but we reinvented it in another way. And you have to be opportunistic like that. That's a real attribute of being entrepreneurial. And I'll say the other thing about entrepreneurism within our sector is that you got to be bold and you got to think big. Our project that was bold and big was developing our Sustainable Food Production and Education Center at the Green Barn, which I just talked about. It was a crazy dream. It was like going out and buying a house when you're unemployed. It felt a bit like that. It was shaky. It was a bit scary. But we as an organization embraced that risk. And I got to say this about risk. It is never just wild abandon. It is calculated risk. You have to do your homework. But there always comes a moment when you're embracing something big where you have to just make a leap of faith. Just have to go for it. Do your homework, but you got to make that leap of faith. And we took that leap of faith with the Barns because we felt it was an incredible opportunity to put our food work on the map, to create a bigger platform to tell our story. And we felt strongly that it would attract attention, people, and dollars required to pull it off. And I don't have an idea related to the board, but I'll tell you, we could talk a lot about the importance of boards. And the board was tough. They asked good questions. They demanded transparency on how the heck we were going to do it. But they took that leap of faith with us, and that was critical. And key to making the decision to go ahead with the Green Barn and being able to actually raise the $5 million to realize that dream was a keen understanding of the context. This is something else related to, yet inner entrepreneurs. You have to understand the context, the zeitgeist, the mood, what's happening out there. And for us, when we looked around, food was everywhere. Michael Pollan, Barbara Kingsolver, Super Size Me, food scares, diet-related illness. It was out there. People were talking about food all the time. We were like, wow, there is a food revolution that we have something to contribute to. People were thinking and asking questions about food, and it was an opportunity for us to insert our perspective into the conversation. We mine this area between universal access and sustainable food. And so we thought, let's inject that into this conversation, because we can't have a two-tier food system. The good food revolution is being led by the middle class. Everyone needs to be a part of that. So I think we've managed to take advantage of that interest to build a wide tent around our approach to food. A lot of people are getting into the tent, and that's critical, to have your tentacles all over the place. And this heightened awareness also helped fuel our social enterprise initiatives, enabling us to reach into wealthier communities through our farmers market, catering, food for change dinners, grow for the stop veggies that we sell in a couple of supermarkets, and our cookbook that I talked about. So along with raising our profile, most of this activity is focused on making a profit and then driving that profit back into our mission. It's not about job creation or about training for vulnerable populations, all good things. But if you're going to walk into the world of social purpose enterprise, decide what it is you're going to get out of it. Be very clear about it. We're clear. I used to do a lot of community economic development when I worked at Dixon Hall. We were really good at community development, terrible about economic. So what we're saying is we're going to really focus on economic, make some money, and then drive it back into our core business. One last thing I'd like to say about embrace your inner entrepreneur. I think in a way, when I got to the stop, I inherited an organization that was largely privately funded. And I think that when you are an organization that is largely privately funded, you have no choice but to be constantly in action mode, creating new ways to come at issues, getting your story out, searching for new audiences. And these funds are often not earmarked. So they enable you to spend where you need it most or to try something new. And we could have a very long conversation about the difference between largely privately funded organizations and those that rely very heavily on government funding. And I personally believe you need an organization that has a nice balance between the two. Right now, we're 90 private, 10 government. Problem. We have lots of diversity within that private, but we recognize that that's an issue. And we're looking, I would say, and again, we can have a great conversation about this, that it's probably a 60-40 split, 50-50 split. Because that private money allows you to take chances. It allows you to jump at things. It gives you the R&D that you need to go out and try. And if you fail, you fail. That's fine. Government funding doesn't come that way, as all of you know who receive it. It's very prescriptive. It's very tight. It's stable, and that's important, and you need that core bit of money in your organization, but it's tight. Remember, it's competitive out there, which is the fourth point. I may be running out of time. I'm going to hurry up a bit here. This, to me, perhaps, is the elephant in this room. Obviously, you never run down another organization. You always give kudos where they are due. I am constantly asked by people, who's good out there? Who's doing good stuff? What about Park? What about this? What about St. Stephen? There are so many incredible organizations, and you give credit where credit is due. But let's be really clear. You need to differentiate yourself from others. Always be clear about the difference you're making, why you have no peers, why you have no equals. We are about using food to build agency. Cooks, gardeners, engaged citizens, volunteers. That's our story. We own it. I will tell that story to whoever wants to hear it. You have to differentiate yourself in a crowded marketplace. Programming has to be solid, but then you must be good at telling your story. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Carol Gore's talk on how to get your stories into the media, great. Go and watch her video. It came out of this 5 good ideas. You need to feel comfortable selling what you do. When I go out for dinner with my wife, she has to say before I go in, you're not here to get the chef to contribute to the silent auction. Now, but you know what? You know, we joke, but it is critical, my friends. You need to be on people's radar because there are people out there who have capacity and interest to contribute, and they want to contribute, and they're going to get behind good ideas, and you need to be on their radar. When Rotary, the local church, Rogers Cable asks you to speak, you speak. And if they don't ask you, tell them why you should be speaking at their events. Has anyone here done an op-ed recently for either the Globe or the Star? Do it. Like, write something. Get it into the press. I used to, in the early days, schedule once a week. I had to get behind my desk, out from my desk. Because you know how easy it is? Yes, you do. To be trapped by your desk? It's impossible. It's impossible. So if you don't schedule that time to go meet with a potential donor or go give a talk or create some headspace to write something, you're never going to get it done. And you have to get it done. Another idea, you need to spend money to make money. Our first hire was flipping an administration position into a fundraising position. She's actually here. It's Nadine Gavkevich. So many years ago, Nadine, who now works at Toronto Community Foundation, worked at the Stop. And that was basically our first hire when we started going in '98. And we had to. We had to create a good database. We eventually bought this program software called Income Manager, very reasonably priced. May drive you crazy, but it's not bad. Relentless research on potential contributors. Never leave a magazine, newspaper read without a person, an organization you're going to follow up with. That's my motto. Look and sound professional. We always hire a photographer once a year. Costs $1,000, $1,500. Not a ton of money, but you want to have great pictures so that you can tell the world what you're doing in your organization. You need to write good copy. You should have a newsletter. We now do an e-news. You always should have an annual report. And there's these things called Twitter and Facebook. And it makes sense to be part of that conversation. And it doesn't always have to cost a bomb. And we can talk a bit about this. In the early days, there were only 1 or 2 people that did all that work. And as we've grown, we've started to specialize. And so, you know, I used to write a lot of the copy for the organization. Now we have a communications person who does that. So, you know, you just say, like it happened for programming too. We had someone who did both cooking and gardening in those early days. I ran the food bank when I first started. You know, I had 2 days a week in the food bank and 3 days as the executive coordinator, I think I was called. But you start to pull those jobs apart as you grow. Now, before you're all left with the impression that I'm a craven capitalist, or before I make my Marxist dad shiver for too long in his boots, I'll get to my final point. And that is to contribute to the public policy conversation, which I put down as AKA don't get swallowed up by service delivery. We're in the nonprofit sector to change the social goalposts, to create a more progressive world, to ensure more prosperity, joy, and equity. You need to be alive to the systemic changes that need to take place in your respective fields of work. You've got to hire politicized staff who aren't interested in charity or delivering a service, who actually come at it with some politics. You need to populate your board with kindred spirits like that. You need to have those people on your board who get it, that the politics matters. And you always have to use your frontline work as the basis for your advocacy. Because when it comes from that place, it's genuine, it's credible, and it's passionate. And most importantly, you have to support your community, the community that you're working with, to speak out about the issues that matter most to them. All our civic engagement work is premised on this value. And that takes you then back to being a good listener. Because when you work closely with your community, in concert with them, you're constantly gaining information that then builds your organization. And don't be scared to do advocacy. In my view, it doesn't turn people off. Rather, it makes you relevant. Obviously, you need to be strategic about the way you advocate. It shouldn't be shrill or partisan. And I know about that 10% rule with the Canadian Revenue Agency. But you know what? You're in the business of building healthier communities. So you can always get around that 10%. Trust me. Just don't even bother with it. Just do it. You just got to do it. For example, our Do the Math campaign is aimed at building a big tent around the idea that social assistance rates are woefully inadequate. And that's about awareness and education to as broad a constituency as possible. Again, that theme of trying to build the tent where you get a lot of people in it. And it is critical, if you're interested in doing advocacy, that you create space within your organization for your staff to be involved in networks, to be involved in coalitions. You got to reserve space at staff meetings to talk about politics. Like, one thing we do is we'll take a chapter of a book or the introduction of a book, and that'll be, required reading for the staff meeting. And guess what? It elicits a conversation. Not everyone, wants to talk about the bigger picture stuff, and that speaks to how you hire. But it's really important to get people out of the trees to think, why are we doing this work? And all of that work around advocacy and civic engagement creates a culture that the big picture matters, that you're contributing to solving, changing, intractable problems. You're part of the solution. And everyone wants to feel part of that conversation. So those are my 5 ideas.